Yo, college students have always protested, especially at Columbia University. For example, on April 23, 1968, Columbia University students began a nonviolent occupation of campus buildings that lasted nearly a week. Students and community supporters called for the university to cut its ties to research for the war in Vietnam and to end construction of a gym in Morningside Park. After negotiations failed, the administration sent in the police, injuring many and arresting over 700, triggering a campus-wide strike that shut down the university. Before we go forward though, let's recall that King was assassinated only 19 days prior on April 4th, 1968. At Columbia and elsewhere, students were reeling. A memorial service for King was disrupted in protest against Columbia's plans to build a gymnasium on public parkland that offered only limited backdoor access to residents of nearby Harlem. An official of the selective service system was hit by a lemon meringue pie during a talk on campus in protest against the draft and the university's involvement with the Institute for Defense Analyses, which did weapons research for the war in Vietnam. On April 23rd, several hundred students gathered at the sundown on Columbia's campus to protest the war and the gym, led by the Student Afro-American Society and Students for a Democratic Society. Some went to Morningside Park, where they tore down a fence around the gymnasium construction site and battled with police. Then they and other protesters marched into Hamilton Hall, Columbia's main undergraduate classroom building, occupied its lobby, and prevented the dean of the college from leaving his office. By morning, African American students continued to occupy Hamilton, while other Columbia and Barnard students, mostly white, took over President Grayson Kirk's office in Low Library. Soon, student protesters took over 3 other buildings: Fayerweather, Mathematics, and Avery. For 6 days, while demonstrations for and against the occupation roiled the campus, faculty members attempted to mediate, but to no avail. The stumbling block, a demand for amnesty for the protesters that the administration was unwilling to accept. In the early morning hours of April 30th, Kirk summoned the New York police, who entered the occupied buildings, beat many of the demonstrators as well as bystanders and faculty members, and arrested more than 700 people. The building occupation was over, but the outrage was just starting to build. Thousands of students and faculty, many radicalized by the police action, went on strike, effectively shutting down the university for the rest of the semester. The gym was never built in Morningside Park, and Columbia's weapons research contract was terminated. But the implications of the 1968 occupation and strike went far beyond those two demands. In the wake of Columbia's protests, campuses around the country exploded, and students took to the streets in cities around the world, from Paris and Prague to Tokyo and Mexico City. The social framework, institutions that excluded minoritized groups, political parties that disenfranchised voters, a government that waged an unpopular war seemed to be coming apart. Hopes were soon dashed. Before the year was out, Kennedy was assassinated. Prague Spring was crushed by Soviet tanks. The Chicago police violently beat protesters at the Democratic Convention, and Richard Nixon was elected president. History doesn't repeat itself, but it often rhymes. Somebody pass this along to the students at Columbia University for me.